Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It's my great pleasure to honor to welcome you all to this second thematic roundtable and co-chair the discussion along with my civil society colleague, Ms. Samridhi Rana Thapa, Disability Inclusion Advisor in the International Committee of the Red Cross from Nepal. Together, we will facilitate this roundtable discussion on the important issue of addressing the rights and needs of older persons with disabilities, aging, and demographic trends. This meeting is held using remote simultaneous interpretation. I kindly ask participants to be mindful of the additional difficulties experienced by interpreters when working remotely and of the increased likelihood of disruptions to the audio feed of the interpreters. In this light, the meeting will adjourn promptly at its scheduled end time, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Participants may select the preferred language to hear the interpretation or choose the choice option to hear the original language of the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, the demographics of our population are changing. The percentage of people aged 60 and above will reach about 21% of the global population by 2050. And presently, almost half of those aged 60 years and above have some form of disability. Through Article 25 on health and Article 28 on adequate standard of living and social protection, the Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities clearly reaffirms the rights of older persons with disabilities. However, many older persons with disabilities continue to experience barriers to the full enjoyment of their rights. The COVID-19 crisis reveals even further the risk and challenges facing older persons with disabilities. Fatality rates among those aged 80 and above are 5 times the global average. They also face heightened risk of violence, abuse, and neglect during the pandemic and multiple and intersecting forms of discriminations in accessing healthcare and social systems. Our roundtable this afternoon will offer an opportunity to discuss the key issues and challenges faced by this particular group in our society, and at the same time to share good practices and experience in realizing the rights of older persons with disabilities to live independently in society and to participate fully in public life. We will also discuss inherent good practices in place for older persons with disabilities in the response to and recovery from COVID-19. Now, I would like to warmly welcome our distinguished panelists we have today. 1, Ms. Ericka Álvarez Ramírez, President of the Board of Directors of the National Council of People with Disabilities and the National Director of Social Security at the Ministry of Labor and Social Security of Costa Rica. 2, Mr. Alexis Rinckenbach, the Head of the European and International Affairs Unit in the Ministry of Social Affairs and Health in France. Mr. Giuseppe Recinto, a Counsellor on Disabilities in the Office of the President of Council in Italy. Ms. Jane Nyawira Miano from the Focus of Disabled Persons in Nairobi. And last but not least, Mr. Yu So Wing from Myanmar Association of Persons Affected by Leprosy. To have a focused and interactive discussion, I will kindly invite each of our panelists to make an initial presentation for 7 minutes. After presentations, we will invite delegations and other observers to join a follow-up interactive discussion with panel members who will respond to questions and comments from the floor. In that segment of about 1 hour, there will be opportunities for delegations and other observers to either pose their specific questions to panelists or to make brief comments that are relevant to the current discussion in a round table. Participants wishing to take the floor are invited to inscribe via the dedicated speaker request form after the chair opens the floor for questions and comments. The link to the speaker's form is available in the chat board of the WebEx event platform. However, the form will only be open for registration when the chair opens the floor for comments. Until then, the form will be closed. When you are given the floor, please unmute yourself and indicate your name, followed by your delegation or organization before posing your questions. Please note, all interventions shall be strictly limited to no longer than 3 minutes, with no exception. Now, let me turn to our distinguished panelists. Please note that when making your oral presentations and engaging in an interactive discussion, you are invited to address one or more of the following questions as outlined in the background paper for the roundtable, namely, A, what legal policy and practical measures can be taken to eliminate the multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination against older persons with disabilities? What measures can be introduced or strengthened to reverse the narratives that stigmatize older persons with disabilities? How can governments realize the right of older persons with disabilities to live independently and be included in the community on an equal basis with others? What innovative ways can governments, civil society, and other stakeholders take to redesign the future of long-term care systems for older persons with disabilities? How can governments, civil society, and other stakeholders ensure that older persons with disabilities participate fully in public life and are engaged, consulted, represented, and listened to with a view of shaping decision-making at all levels? What can governments, civil society, and other stakeholders do to ensure that older persons with disabilities have access to assistive technology devices and ensure the new development thereof, so that they can live independent, autonomous, and dignified lives and fully participate in society basis with others? What are some of the emerging best practices of targeted and mainstreamed social protection measures that have been or are being implemented to protect older persons with disabilities in the mitigation of, response to, and recovery from COVID-19 pandemic? What efforts can governments step up to ensure that the high mortality rate faced by older persons with disabilities observed during the pandemic is not repeated? What legal, policy, and practical measures are necessary to address the challenges older persons with disabilities face in humanitarian situations? How can the accountability of all actors involved in the response to humanitarian crises and pandemics be strengthened to guarantee the rights of older persons with disabilities, including the response and recovery measures related to COVID-19? How can governments realize their obligation to ensure the accessibility for the older persons with disabilities of the physical environment, transportation, and information and communications technology? Lastly, what kind of educational approaches need to be developed to better prepare human beings and society for aging and for the adaptation of the environment to enable their independent living? Now, it is my honor to introduce and invite our first panelist speaker, Ms. Ericka Álvarez Ramírez, President of the Board of Directors at the National Council of People with Disabilities and National Director of Social Security at the Ministry of Labor and Social Security of Costa Rica. Ms. Ramírez has extensive experience in the promotion and protection of human rights, with a focus on persons with disabilities. She is a lawyer by profession and has held various positions in the public service. Since 2015, she is Costa Rica's expert in the Inter-American Committee for the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Persons with Disabilities. Ms. Ramírez, the floor is yours. Please remember to keep your presentation to 7 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. It is an honor for us as a country to have the opportunity to participate in this round table. I'd like to express my thanks to you from the government of Costa Rica for this opportunity. Firstly, we must recognize that progress in the rights of persons with disabilities has been the result of coordinated intersectoral and international work. The convention itself was the result of the highest level of participation in the history of international conventions. And that result stemmed from the joint work of organizations for persons with disabilities and states in previous years. And we believe that work on implementing the convention must focus on multi-sectoral initiatives and projects involving actors of civil society, governments, and agents for international cooperation in order to develop research and to have a strategic focus which recognizes the need to gather disaggregated data, which is broken down by disability, age, gender, and not just the drafting of public policies, but also follow-up monitoring and accountability. I would point out that the population in Latin America and the Caribbean is aging faster than in any other region of the world, and this demographic trend suggests that care for older persons who have a functional dependence or who have a disability must become one of the main focuses of our public agenda so that we can quickly adapt and redirect our social services and our social protection systems in our countries. The data speak for themselves. Today, 8 million older persons require assistance to carry out basic activities of daily living, and in 30 years there will be 27 million of them. And that is why the Inter-American region has worked very hard on the Inter-American Convention on the Protection of the Human Rights of Older Persons, which entered into force on January 1st, 2017. We believe that such conventions can open the door to speeding up access for older persons with disabilities. In Costa Rica, more particularly, we've placed emphasis on data generation, and we've developed the first National Disability Survey in 2018. We based ourselves on the WHO survey model. That survey has given us key data about the population, such as the fact that 18.2% of the population in Costa Rica are people with disabilities. 61% of people with disabilities in Costa Rica are women. The survey revealed, moreover, that disability bears the face of an older person because out of 100 people with disabilities, 35% or 35 of them are over the age of 60. Another key data for the generation of social policies is that 52.7% of the population with disability live in poverty or extreme poverty. In terms of mental health, 3.5% of the population is facing some form of psychosocial functional limitation, and 30% of persons with disabilities have said that they have had or they are going through a depression. They've suffered from anxiety or from some other disorder. Our country, therefore, has worked very hard on recognizing the legal equality, ensuring legal capacity for persons with disabilities. We've done so by adopting the law on personal autonomy of persons with disabilities. It aims to ensure autonomy and independent life for persons with intellectual, psychosocial, or other forms of disabilities, and it has had a particular impact on the lives of older persons with psychosocial disabilities who, with horrifying frequency, are subjected to proceedings to declare their legal incapacity. That is no longer a situation which arises in our legal system. The law prioritizes full legal equality for all persons with disabilities and provides safeguards for exercising legal capacity and autonomy by appointing a guarantor for this person with disability to help them with decision-making process and exercising their rights. half of the resources provided for under the law are devoted exclusively to older persons with disabilities. That has led to the implementation of the Program for Personal Autonomy of Persons with Disabilities under the National Council for Persons with Disabilities. These individuals benefit from payments so that they can have the services of a personal assistance, and the time for that assistance is from 8 hours a day to 240 hours a month. Aging and disability are factors of exclusion, and they have a critical impact on the most vulnerable citizens who have a limited or informal support network. And therefore, from a human rights perspective, the SDGs and the Agenda 2030 help to set the goals to guarantee the rights to social protection in the current context and to leave no one behind. And we are committed to developing an agenda of social protection policies aimed at caring for people living in situations of greater vulnerability who are subjected to poverty or who face a number of challenges which keep them marginalized. And that is the case of older persons with disabilities. The Actuarial Department of Costa Rica's Social Security Fund has indicated that some 235,000 older persons are living in single-person households, and out of them, some 8,677 are living in extreme poverty. For those who have a family network, 72% of the people who provide care are women, and that figure is even higher. It goes up to 80.4% when these individuals have greater support needs. The National Disability Survey revealed that some 281,378 personal assistants providing services in their families do not receive remuneration for their services. Undoubtedly, that creates an unfavorable condition for individuals with disabilities receiving assistance, and it increases levels of poverty in the families of persons with a functional dependence, be they a person living with disability or older persons. We are working currently on our National Comprehensive Care Policy for older persons and persons with disabilities. As I mentioned earlier, the relationship between disability and age is very evident in Costa Rica. Disability can happen at any time of the life cycle, but it is when one is older that the barriers and challenges arise, in particular for persons with disabilities and their families. The National Strategy on Healthy Aging has been developed, and it will have an impact on the lifestyle of persons with disabilities in terms of their emotional and physical well-being, and it recognizes their independent life and participation in a number of spheres. We are also working on early retirement for persons suffering from Down syndrome, because it has been shown that they age at an earlier rate, at a faster rate, and this has an impact on their work life and exposes them to greater wear and tear and health risks. And so the pensionable age has been set at 45 as long as they have made 180 contributions to the Social Security Fund. Finally, in terms of mental and emotional health, we are working on situations with a human rights perspective. And in Costa Rica, since 2017, we no longer institutionalize individuals suffering from intellectual and psychosocial disabilities. During the COVID-19 pandemic, we have worked on providing alternatives for persons living in situations of abandonment and at high risk. We now have COVID homes. There are alternative residences for these individuals to help them in a post-COVID convalescence phase. And we are also providing social protection alternatives after this period to welcome these individuals so they do not return to situations of social risk and homelessness. During the social distancing period, we are trying to ensure access to open spaces for persons with disabilities, particularly older persons with psychosocial disabilities, taking account of the required physical distancing and the protection measures needed to limit the spread of the virus. We are attempting to make sure that there is no breakdown for this individual that could seriously impact their behavior or their health and their psychophysical and emotional well-being. Other measures that we are taking is to raise awareness about the spread of the virus. And we've been carrying out this task since March of 2020. Let me close by saying that the challenge of achieving a better world by 2020 should not be cut short by the current pandemic. Our response to this crisis is an opportunity to build back better from a human rights perspective and recognize that from the inception of proposals, equality, ensuring equality also always involves progress and development for all of society. Thank you.
I thank Ms. Ramírez for her excellent presentation. Our next speaker is Mr. Alexis Rinckenbach, the head of the European and International Affairs Unit of the Social Cohesion, General Directorate in the Ministry of Social Affairs and Health, and at the State Secretariat for Disabled Persons in France. He serves as the current Vice Chair of the UNITC Working Group on Aging and France National Coordinator for SDG 1 and SDG 5. He is also one of France's representatives at the EU's high-level group on disability. Mr. Rinckenbach, the floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, delegates, distinguished colleagues, aging of the population is one of the most formidable phenomena of our era. This presents a number of challenges that need to be met today, but also presents tremendous opportunities for more inclusive societies. In order to consider these new challenges, the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, the UNECE, has set up an intergovernmental working group dedicated to aging, which I co-chair. We publish regularly concept notes, which are available on the United Nations website. The most recent concept note focuses on elderly individuals in situations of emergency. The remarks are illustrated with examples of good practices in various countries. In the UNECE region, individuals aged over 65 represent nearly 17% of the population in 2020. This share is expected to reach 21% in 2030, 24% in 2050, according to forecasts. The share of individuals over age 80 is expected to double in the next 30 years and surpass 4.5% in 2020, reaching 9% in 2050. This is a phenomenon that reflects the positive progress in terms of life expectancy. However, unfortunately, it means that aging is not experienced in good health by all. At the EU, life expectancy is established for men at 78.3 for men and 83.5 for women, and yet the expectancy of life in good health in that regard, the European average is 64 years for women and 63.5 for men. The Madrid International Action Plan on Aging specifically invites United Nations member states to spare no effort to enable individuals who are aging to carry out active lives and to remain independent as long as possible. To that end, the UNECE has, since 2014, together with the European Commission, established a tool to gauge the contribution to the economy and society of seniors in Europe. Through all of their activities, This is comprised of 22 indicators bringing together 4 sectors, including that of an independent life in good health. The active aging index is calculated by each member state. This is a tool that helps to assess how various countries tap into the potential of older generations in terms of active aging good health. This is addressed at the regional level, UNECE, nationally, and locally. This demographic context should be viewed positively as an opportunity to tailor our societies to make them more inclusive and enable independent life. One of the goals of the Madrid Plan is the regional implementation strategy for member states of the UNECE region and to improve housing and environmental design to promote an independent life by taking into account, as set out in the plan, the needs of older persons, specifically older persons with disabilities. For these individuals to remain fully independent, there's a need to consider support solutions. In France, we have a law dating November 2018 on developments in housing planning and the digital sector to rethink housing. In order to address the needs throughout people's lives, this law establishes new accessibility standards. 100% of new housing units should be adaptive and evolutionary nature. This means that they are to be made fully accessible for simple, low-cost construction, and full accessibility to common areas, residence areas, and medical services is guaranteed without additional construction. This law also generates momentum for what we call in France an inclusive environment for older persons or persons with disabilities. This is an alternative to institutions or the home. This is a type of environment that helps to ensure safety and security and support for individuals to have freedom to move, and it helps for an individual. It allows for an individual to live alone without being alone, sharing common areas and ensuring social interaction. The public French authorities created this summer a new social security branch dedicated to independence. This should help to ensure greater equity and access to services and benefits. This should also provide for simplified organization to deal with dependence, be this age-related or disability-related dependence. This is a new branch that is a cornerstone of reform focusing on older persons and independence. This was announced at the beginning of President Macron's 5-year term. This reform should generate momentum for structural changes to the approach to losing independence and should be ushered in as planned in 2021. During a roundtable, we pondered difficulties encountered by older persons with disabilities. And I would also like to focus on caretakers. These personal assistants, 8% in France, are women, and they experience great difficulties balancing family life, professional life, and the key role played in day-to-day life. Headway is being made to make progress and to care for our caretakers. In France, for example, a 2015 law on societal adaptation to aging recognizes the status of a close personal assistant, which concerns personal assistants who cohabitate with the person being assisted or with close ties to them, be they family ties or other. Ladies and gentlemen, as we seek to surmount the consequences of COVID-19, let us fully take the opportunity to fully implement the No One Left Behind principle under Agenda 2030. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rinckenbach, for your awesome presentation. Now it's my honor to present our next panelist, Mr. Giuseppe Recinto, Counsellor on Disability in the Office of the President of Council in Italy. As a professor of private law at the University of Federico II of Naples, Mr. Recinto's area of research includes family law, the rights of minors, and the rights to health. He has also served as an advisor. So he serves as an advisor to the President of the Council on Ministers on Disability Issues and legal advisor to the Ministry of University and Research. Ms. Valentina Sorry. Ms. Rinckenbach, you have the floor now.
Thank you.
Sorry. Ms. Valentina Mialini will be providing consecutive interpretation for Mr. Recinto. Sorry for that. Go ahead. Thank you. You have the floor.
Allora, illustri colleghi, è per me un onore intervenire qui oggi nel ruolo di consigliere in materia di disabilità del Presidente del Consiglio dei Ministri Giuseppe Conte. A voi tutti porgo i saluti del Primo Ministro e di tutto il governo italiano. Un governo italiano che per la prima volta vede nella persona del Primo Ministro la delega alla disabilità e la costituzione presso l'ufficio della Presidenza di un ufficio dedicato alle politiche della disabilità per garantire una corretta azione di mainstreaming.
Distinguished colleagues, I'm honored to take the floor here today. In my capacity as the advisor to Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte on disability matters, please allow me to convey the greetings of the Italian Prime Minister and of the Italian government as a whole. And the Italian government then that for the first time ever decided to keep for itself, the Prime Minister decided to keep for himself the powers on disability matters and established an office on disability at the office of the Prime Minister.
Il paese che rappresenta una popolazione particolarmente anziana, il cui valore aggiunto non può che costituire un patrimonio importantissimo per chi come noi compie scelte politiche. Queste stesse persone però sono purtroppo anche coloro che durante questa terribile pandemia hanno pagato il prezzo più alto, in Italia come negli altri paesi.
The country I'm representing today has a particularly old population whose value added can only but be a very important asset for those who, like ourselves, are making political choices. However, those people have also paid the highest price in the ongoing pandemic, not only in Italy, but also in many other countries.
Su questo tema mi sento dunque di riprendere e condividere con voi le parole recentemente pronunciate dal Presidente del Consiglio dei Ministri italiano, che in materia di disabilità ha ricordato come l'emergenza da Covid-19 ci ha chiaramente mostrato quanto possa essere vulnerabile un sistema prettamente centrato sulla protezione, che tende a costituire luoghi e percorsi speciali e separati.
In this respect, allow me to refer to and share with you the words that have recently been pronounced by the Italian Prime Minister. Talking about disability, he highlighted that the COVID-19 emergency, and I'm quoting, has clearly shown how vulnerable a system exclusively based on protection can be. A system that tends to build special and separate places and pathways.
Al contrario, è necessario far tesoro di quanto accaduto e cominciare da subito a investire su un welfare basato sulla promozione, quale principale strumento di protezione della persona. Allo stesso tempo occorre inoltre lavorare al consolidamento del mainstreaming della disabilità, nella convinzione che non servono politiche speciali, ma attente e inclusive.
On the contrary, we should learn from experience and start, as of now, investing in welfare in a system based on promotion, with promotion being the main element for a person's protection. In the meantime, we should start working on consolidating disability mainstreaming, as we believe that no special policies are required, but rather very targeted and inclusive ones.
Non vi può essere dunque centralità della persona senza un effettivo diritto all'autodeterminazione. Considerate anche i rischi sanitari, ma non solo, che si annidano nei servizi di presa in carico totale. Ne è purtroppo un esempio il dramma che si è consumato in alcune strutture residenziali di diversi paesi colpiti dalla pandemia.
Hence, considering the risks hidden in full care services, including health-related ones, but not limited to those, there can be no person centricity without a real right to self-determination. Unfortunately, a paramount example is the hopeless plight they have faced in some nursing homes in various countries hit by the pandemic.
È necessario investire seriamente sulla destituzionalizzazione e su percorsi e strategie personalizzate, legate dunque da una concezione meramente anagrafica dei bisogni.
We should seriously invest on deinstitutionalizing and on designing customized processes and strategies free from any age-related understanding of a person's needs.
Da qualche anno l'Italia si è dotata degli strumenti necessari per introdurre nel proprio welfare un cambiamento di paradigma, come la legge sul progetto individuale e la legge sul cosiddetto dopo di noi.
For a few years now, Italy has made instruments available allowing introducing a paradigm shift in its welfare system. Among such instruments are the individual project law and the law on so-called after us.
Queste due importanti leggi perseguono la finalità della piena integrazione delle persone con disabilità attraverso una programmazione globale degli interventi. Entrambe infatti assicurano la continuità nei servizi erogati a prescindere dal dato anagrafico e hanno come obiettivo il raggiungimento del maggior livello di autonomia possibile della persona.
Both important pieces of legislation aim at obtaining full integration of the people with disabilities by including all actions in a single planning effort. As a matter of fact, both laws ensure continuity in terms of benefits and services provided, regardless of the people's age. They both aim at reaching the highest possible degree of independence of the individual.
Siamo convinti che abbiamo il dovere morale di far tesoro degli insegnamenti tratti dalla pandemia, raddoppiando gli sforzi finora profusi per dare concreta attuazione a quanto sancito dalla Convenzione ONU.
We believe we have the moral duty to treasure the lessons learned from this pandemic, thus multiplying the efforts we have been making so far to fully implement the provisions of the UN Convention.
Continueremo a lavorare per superare le rigidità derivanti dai tradizionali modelli culturali, sostituendoli con quelli più inclusivi, basati sull'unicità della persona e dei suoi bisogni materiali, ma anche esistenziali, relazionali, affettivi, formativi e culturali. Questo affinché si possa sviluppare realmente un welfare che privilegi il percorso individualizzato di vita indipendente, valorizzando e tutelando anche il ruolo delle famiglie e di coloro che ne hanno cura.
We will continue working to eliminate all obstacles created by traditional cultural models and to replace such models with more inclusive ones based on the uniqueness of each person and on each person's needs, including material needs, existential needs, relational, emotional, educational, and cultural needs. This, in order to be able to really develop a welfare system envisaging tailor-made processes towards an independent life, also enhancing and protecting the roles of families and caretakers.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I thank very much Mr. Recinto for his superb contribution. At this junction, I will now hand over to my co-chair, Ms. Samridhi Rana Thapa, Civil Society Representative from the International Committee of the Red Cross.
Good afternoon, Your Excellency, Mr. Israel Choko Davies, Deputy Permanent Representative and Chargé d'Affaires of the Permanent Mission of Liberia to the United Nations. It is my privilege and honor to co-chair this roundtable with you today. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Civil Society Coordination Mechanism and UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs for recommending and inviting me to this panel. As a professional with a proven track record working for the rights of persons with disabilities, particularly in designing, mainstreaming services and projects for persons with disabilities, aging population, and their families, I know how important the issues that we're discussing in this roundtable are. Our next speaker is Ms. Jane Nyawira Miano. Ms. Miano is the founder of Focus for Disabled Persons in Nairobi, with half of its members aged 60 and above. She is the voice of older persons with disabilities and is an active member of Older Persons Association and a community leader, raising awareness of disability in older age. Let's welcome Ms. Miano to make her presentation. Ms. Miano, you have 7 minutes. The floor is yours.
Yes. Thank you. I'm 71 years old and aging with disability, having suffered a bout of polio at 8 months of age. I have faced stigma, discrimination, and many challenges since childhood in the community, school, place of work, and in the society. As a child, I was rehabilitated at home by my mother and also carried on her back to and from school for 4 kilometers. Then, as a job seeker with physical challenges, later on at work as a woman with a disability, and now as a retired aged woman with a disability, and thus facing multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination. From my experience, the challenges increase, become harder, and worse with advancing age. For example, at 55 years of age, my limbs became weaker to a point that I could no longer use my crutches and a caliper, and thus got confined to a wheelchair. With reduced mobility, I'm no longer able to use public transport in my country, and the transport for hire is costly, especially for a person aging with a disability without adequate social protection. However, it is worth noting that whichever form of transport, the older persons with disabilities are disadvantaged because they cannot use, they need help all the way and they cannot manage on their own. Thus, they are unable to observe physical distancing rule, so they are exposed to infection just as much as those in institutions. With a dwindling strength, I was unable to continue living alone and doing my domestic chores, and so I have to live with a helper. Consequently, my independence was adversely affected, and I can no longer live and make independent decisions. I need somebody to assist me somehow. In this situation, I am also not able to observe the physical distancing rule. I was also unable to continue managing my small businesses, which has led to reduced finances and reduced no independence. And so I depend on others to cater for my medical bills and also pay for my caregiver. In addition, I now need to use more assistive devices and such as shower seat and sliding board, among others, which often are not accessible and affordable. Usually, in my voluntary work, I am presented with the cases of older persons who have suddenly lost their mobility and so in urgent need of assistive devices and especially wheelchairs. Unfortunately, such ones do not qualify for the assistive devices assistance from the National Disability Council without prior registration as a person with a disability. More often than not, age is accompanied by non-communicable diseases, which the older persons, and especially those aging with disabilities, cannot cater for unless they are adequately covered medically. For example, although my mother was in the social protection program, it was very costly for the family to cater for the treatment and management of cancer. The worst hit by COVID-19 pandemic are the older persons and especially those aging with disabilities who are not only prone to the infections due to the aging with the disability who are prone to the infections leading to death, mainly due to their underlying health conditions, but also suffering from unmet health and care, increased isolation, discrimination, and stigma. In less developed countries, basic needs such as food is also of great concern. There is need to create communities that can provide care to the vulnerable and in which all can thrive in equity during and after the COVID-19 pandemic. Such communities should have accessible health and healthcare services, accessible transport and communication, accessible and affordable houses for all ages, friendly environment, and quality support services. The older persons, and especially those aging with disabilities world over, have continued to be subjected to home confinement and care institutions, and especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, mainly due to ageism and stereotypes propagated against them. A practice which contravenes Article 19 of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, stipulating that the rights for all persons with disabilities to live independently and being included in the community, and which does not discriminate on the age limit. Even as the governments make policies to address the world rapid population aging, it is imperative to include the older persons with disabilities and ensure their participation in all levels and stages of decision-making in the COVID-19 response and beyond. There is need for the government world over to urgently advance the protection and promotion of human rights for older people with focus on those aging with disabilities because they are more vulnerable than their counterparts. The fact is that we are all aging, and the big question for each one of us is whether you can age and live independently with dignity in your community, and especially if you age with a disability and worse still, dementia.
Ms. Miano, you have 30 seconds. Great.
Yes.
Thank you.
My last question is, my last sentence is that we all need to think over and see whether the communities we are living in are capable to sustain us when we age with a disability and worse still, dementia.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Miano, for those very relevant points. Now, allow me to introduce and invite Mr. U So Win to address this panel. Mr. Win is the chair of the Myanmar Association of Persons Affected by Leprosy. He played an active role in Myanmar CRPD ratification and has been involved in CRPD working group and committee sessions. Mr. Win advocates for the rights of persons with leprosy-related disabilities at the legislative level and the rights of older persons with disabilities at national and global leprosy-related conferences. Mr. Zo Mo Ong will be interpreting on behalf of Mr. U So Win. Mr. Win and Mr. Ong, you have the floor.
Thank you. On behalf of Mr. So Win, quote, Minglaba, greetings. My name is So Win and I am 67 years old. I live in Patain in Myanmar and I live with disability as a result of leprosy. I'm very proud to meet with such distinguished guests and officials at this meeting. Thank you for granting me this opportunity to talk about my experiences and those of other disabled older persons in Myanmar. There are nearly 6 million persons with disability living in Myanmar, and amongst this number, there are many who are above 60 years old. Our census data shows us that more than half of persons over 70 years old are persons with disability. Our data also tells us that 1 in 60 disabled persons in Myanmar are disabled because of leprosy. I am grateful that Myanmar is a signatory of the Conventions on the Rights of Persons with Disability. This means that our government is committed to considering the education, economic, and social needs of persons with disability across all of their walks. At the same time, We are fortunate to have active organizations of persons with disability who support each other and the government in making the CRPD a reality. However, not enough is being done to meet the needs of older persons affected by disability and leprosy. Our opportunities to contribute to or engage with our society and communities are frequently limited. In many respects, I consider myself fortunate. I am an elected member of my local administration with an opportunity to represent my community. I also travel widely through the country to raise awareness of leprosy alongside the Leprosy Mission Myanmar and the Myanmar Associations of Persons Affected by Leprosy. I am grateful for these opportunities and work hard to live up to the responsibilities bestowed upon me. However, I spent much of my life navigating discrimination because of the visible disabilities that mark me as a person affected by leprosy. People apply stigma to leprosy. They see it as a curse or believe it to be highly contagious. Hotels have refused me to give me a room. Restaurants have been ashamed to serve me, forcing me to eat quickly hidden in the corner. When I traveled to Geneva to report to the CRPD committee last year, I was forced to change seats on the plane 3 times because people did not want to sit next to me. There are many older persons just like me in Myanmar. They are turned away from businesses because of their disabilities, mark them as being a person affected by leprosy. Because of leprosy, because of visible disabilities, and because of age, we face intersecting discrimination. Any one of those forms of discriminations has been enough to ignore a person or show them disrespect. Any one of those things could mean a person has their rights taken from them. I'm conscious that I must overcome all of this in order to prove my worth and assess my rights. As I have said, my experience of discriminations as an older person affected by leprosy-related disability is not unique within Myanmar, nor are such attitudes unique to Myanmar. Persons affected by leprosy face these discriminations in every nation affected by leprosy. The government of Myanmar must do more to raise awareness of leprosy so that people are not afraid or stigmatize us. I wish to have legal protection if people reject me from their businesses. This way, persons affected by leprosy can enjoy the same rights and access as all other persons. This will be a victory for all persons affected by leprosy, but particularly for older persons affected by leprosy. Older persons are at risk of isolation, and we combat this in Myanmar through elderly daycare centers and homes for ages. However, older persons affected by leprosy often find it difficult to access these centers and homes because of incorrect fears around leprosy. They are turned away from their community because of leprosy and leprosy-related disability. As well as raising awareness of leprosy, our government should do what they can to demonstrate and publicize the contributions of older persons, and particularly older persons with disability. I want people in my country to know that we have something to offer. I want to know for my service to my community, not because holders refuse to give me a room. All of what I've said already gives you an appreciation of the intersecting discriminations that older persons affected by leprosy-related disability can face in Myanmar. However, as well as facing discrimination, older persons are also often isolated from the social and economic hubs of our society. In many rural communities, walking long distances to access employment is common. This means that many older persons living with disabilities are forced to stay at home, and the journey would be too difficult for them to take each day. They find themselves isolated from livelihoods, from income, from community. They find themselves dependent on their families to get by. And whilst the government of Myanmar has taken steps in recent years that provide more welfare support to older persons, it does not go far enough. A person over 80 years old may receive around $10 a month, but there are no pensions for persons in Myanmar unless they work for the government in the past. This means that a person is forced to save while they are working, or they must continue working into old age, which is not an option for many older persons with disability when the locations of jobs are out of reach. Too many older persons with disability are living in poverty because there is not enough support for them. With an aging population, the looming crisis of old age poverty is serious in Myanmar, particularly among those living with disabilities. Our nations and many other developing nations across the world must react to these changing demographics before crisis strikes. I call on governments to set up support systems for older persons with leprosy and disabilities so that no one is forced to live in poverty because they are not able to access work. There are many other great things that our government could do to support older persons living with disability and leprosy, but raising awareness and providing financial supports are two great places to start. Thank you again for giving me your time. And
Thank you. Thank you for your powerful presentation, Mr. Nguyen, and sticking to time. I would like to thank all panelists for their presentation. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we now move on to the second phase of this roundtable, that is interactive discussion between the panelists and the delegations. As we informed you at the outset of the panel discussion, in the following segment of approximate 1 hour or so, there will be opportunities for delegations and other observers to request the floor, to either pose specific questions to panelists or make a brief comment relevant to the current discussion in the roundtable. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, now I open the floor. As you know, to make such requests, delegates are invited to request for the floor through a dedicated speaker request form accessible in the chat board of the WebEx event platform for the next 3 minutes. After that, we will close the list. Please select "Send me a copy of my responses" in the bottom of the form. Accredited NGOs and other observers have prior to this conference already submitted their requests in writing to the Secretariat. Please only take the floor when invited to speak. When the name of your delegation or organization is called, your microphone will be unmuted. Please either pose specific questions to any panelists or make your brief comments relevant as mentioned to the current discussion. The delivery of written statements is strongly discouraged. All interventions may speak no more than 3 minutes, with no exceptions. Speakers shall start wrapping up at 2 minutes and 30 seconds, and the microphones will be automatically muted when the time is elapsed. I count on everyone for your cooperation to keep to the time limit. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I recognize Mr. Maxim Biryukov from Russian Federation as the first one in my list. I kindly invite you to take the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Pursuant to the decree of the Russian President dating 21 July 2020, number 474, the Russian Development Goals for the period up until 2030, this decree sets out a national goal safeguarding health and welfare of people, and it sets out a life expectancy indicator, 78 years. To achieve this goal, efforts of all social structures are geared towards providing systemic support for older citizens, improving the quality of their lives, enacting measures to safeguard the health of older citizens, ensuring social, economic, psychological, and material welfare. Specifically, a key thrust of the federal blueprint entitled The Older Generation under a National Plan Demography is to create by 2024 conditions to lengthen the period of active longevity and the duration of people's lives, as well as to improve living quality for elderly citizens. This includes balanced social services and medical assistance at home. Assistance is provided to ensure social services in Russian constituent territories at the appropriate quality level, as well as and efforts are geared towards eliminating queues for such services. And there are other measures to supplement vocational training for related individuals. Since 2016, in Russia, we have been implementing an action strategy for elder citizens up until 2025. The aim is, inter alia, to help help older persons with disabilities, their families, as well as individuals providing them with care. This includes targets to improve government policies and to help improve living quality for elder citizens, as well as to more fully harness their potential and their participation in society. There is voting currently underway for plans to implement the second stage of the strategy for the period 2021 to 2025. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Buryakov. I now recognize Muhaimin from Malaysia. The floor is yours.
Faced in providing an enabling environment for persons with disabilities or lack of understanding and access to relevant information by the employers. These are among prevalent findings from the study on job opportunities for persons with disabilities in Malaysia, conducted by the Ministry of Women, Family and Community Development. The government continues to remain committed in increasing awareness among the public and private sector through advocacy and engagement programs. The Department of Social Welfare and the Government of Japan, through its agency, Japan International Cooperation Agency, since 2005, had collaborated in a project to train job coaches to support job seekers with disabilities. The Job Coach service is a form of employment support provided to employers and employees to ensure that disabled Malaysians can remain in employment. Under this project, experts from Japan had conducted training for Department of Social Welfare officers and NGOs using the Job Coach Service Program module. The Job Coach Service Program has proved to be among the successful programs in increasing employability of persons with disabilities. In 2020, a total of 135 companies have enrolled in this program with 178 persons with disabilities. Since its beginning in 2012, a total of 1,397 persons with disabilities have been assisted by the Job Coach. Among companies that introduced Job Coach service program in their workplace are Aeon, McDonald's, Mydin, and Uniqlo. And since 2013, Malaysia has actively extended technical expertise to conduct Job Coach training to countries such as Myanmar, Jordan, and Egypt. Malaysia is prepared to offer technical assistance on this to any other member states that are interested. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Muhaimin. I now recognize Teo Hoffren from Finland. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for raising these extremely important topics. We must guarantee that the rights of older persons with disabilities are realized in accordance with the UNCRPD and Agenda 2030. The response to demographic change needs to be multi-generational, and longevity needs to be acknowledged as a major success of societies. Principles of equal opportunity, equality and inclusion are in the center of discussions of aging in the context of health, social and fiscal policies. Average life expectancy of persons with disabilities has increased in recent decades, which means that there are more older persons with disabilities than before. In Finland, aim is that older persons with disabilities, especially women who are the majority in the group, are able to live independently at their own homes for as long as possible. It is therefore important that preventive activities and services are available. Services that prevent the deterioration of well-being and functional capacity are essential when planning services for older persons. Digitalization in services and introduction of new technologies create new opportunities also for older persons with disabilities to implement self-care. Digitalization can strengthen daily survival, social inclusion, and functional capacity of vulnerable older persons. Accessibility, ease of use, reliability, and digital skills of elderly person must be taken in account in planning and producing digital-based services. Digitalization can save resources and enable resources to be directed to those persons who need a lot of services. It is humanly important that elderly persons with disabilities can influence their own lives and maintain their ability to act. It needs to be stressed that many older persons with disabilities are particularly vulnerable during the COVID-19 pandemic. Every person has an inherent right to life, and all the necessary measures must be taken to ensure that persons with disabilities can enjoy this right on an equal basis with others. Persons with disabilities have the same right as everyone else to receive services without discrimination on the basis of disability. This equal right also applies to necessary social and healthcare, including rehabilitation and assistive technology. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hoffren. Now, I would like to recognize Mr. Gerard Quinn, the UN Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Mr. Quinn, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, participants, and ladies and gentlemen, it's a real honor to participate in this roundtable, and I congratulate UNDESA for organizing it. It really is intersectionality in action, which is incredibly important and is the future. I have two main reactions and comments on the panelists' participation. First, at the level of ideas, and secondly, in terms of practical arrangements going forward. At the level of ideas, what's at play here is the concepts of ableism and the concepts of ageism. And it's pretty plain, at least to me, that what unites both of them is the invisibility of the persons concerned. I think Mr. Ong put it very well from Myanmar, that we have something to offer. We are visible, we are subjects, we are not objects. But unfortunately, it seems to be the case that both ageism and ableism renders the individual invisible, and therefore it's no surprise during a crisis like pandemic that they are left even further behind than before. So I'd be very interested to hear the panelists' views as to the overlap between ageism and ableism, and particularly whether our efforts to combat ableism have any lessons to combat ageism. My second point is more practical. What would the panelists consider the future of long-term care to be? Is it in residential institutions? We've all seen how older people with disabilities have suffered terribly in such institutions due to the COVID pandemic. Or is it in a rededicated attempt to invest in the community and to make community living a reality for all, which includes older people as well as persons with disabilities? Mr. Recinto from Italy mentioned the paradigm shift taking place on age in Italy, and I'd be extremely interested to hear, does that mean an emphasis on community care as an alternative to institutional care for older people in the future? Thank you so much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Quinn. Ms. Diana Iona Tudorancia, Distinguished Representative, Malta.
Excellencies, dear colleagues, firstly, I would like to congratulate the panelists who gave us extremely valuable insights. Speaking on behalf of Agencia Support, Malta's government disability service provider, as a research and policy officer, I can state that Malta has long commenced efforts to understand the demographic tendencies and support needs of disabled persons growing older within our services. So the mean age of disabled persons is always changing, and much like the general population, we're seeing that our service beneficiaries begin to be increasingly represented in the older percentiles. To that end, we carried research to map the current state of play, and with the aim of collecting disaggregated data so that we can understand how to mitigate the risks of those who may grow to experience compounded health issues and develop appropriate recommendations. In the report we created, we found that our efforts must be two-pronged. For one, to ensure that the person receives all the additional health supports that they may require so that they can continue enjoying the highest possible attainable standard of health, and also ensure that they have enough social support to help them overcome the inevitable losses of older family members and friends, and also the reduction of already small social circles. Moreover, in 2020, we've seen that providing older generations with up-to-date assistive technology, especially long-distance communication devices and adaptive technology, and ensuring that they're empowered enough to use such technology is no longer an option. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. I would like to now recognize Katerina Ivankovich Nezevic, Distinguished Representative of European Union. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much. My camera, I switched on the wrong side, but not to waste time on the camera. What is important is that why are we here this evening, and what we are going to discuss about addressing the rights of and the needs of older persons with disabilities. And in European Union, we see a strong relation between age and disability. We see about half of the European population above 65 years of age to have some form of the disability. If you take it in the absolute numbers, it amounts to about 41 million of persons. The data that we have at the EU 27 level reveal that persons with disabilities indeed face the higher risk of poverty compared to the persons without disabilities. Also, we see that majority of persons are in need of long-term care and are that those people are persons with disabilities. Also, the data show that over 70% of those living in households who need long-term care declare having some kind of disability. This figure will be much higher for those in residential care. Addressing community-based services, and all of the previous speakers spoke about it, provision for community-based service provision for persons with disabilities is thus essential to address the needs of an aging population, to support their right to live independently and live in the community. I believe that all of us have seen how COVID has hit dramatically persons living in institutions, in particular older persons with disabilities. The increased use of digital media during the COVID-19 crisis left behind older persons, especially those with disabilities who were not always able to use information and communication technologies, in particular because of their limited accessibility. The availability and affordability of assistive technologies represents an additional challenge as older persons acquire multiple disabilities that come with age. Mr. President, given the demographic trends in the EU, it is more important than ever to remain active and in good health at an old age. I would also like to ask two questions to our panelists. One is, how do they think that it would be possible to reduce the poverty gap of older persons with disabilities and compensate the extra costs associated with impairments that come with the age? And the other one, how to better support independent living in the community for older persons with disabilities. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I now invite Marta Mocho, Distinguished Representative of Morocco, to kindly close the intervention.
Thank you very much. And good afternoon, good evening, good morning, maybe to all panelists. Thank you very much to the panelists for sharing their perspectives on the question of addressing the rights and needs of older persons with disabilities. And allow me to maybe make a remark and then a question. The question of both ageism and ableism are both interlinked and overlapped. This is generally used by different groups as a statement. So my question relates to the fact that we note that some activist groups do not adhere to the idea of overlapping of policies between aging and disability, and may argue against it. Some may think that elderly persons have already one form of stigma, namely age, and they do not want to be, unfortunately, labeled with another stigma related to disability, which is often understood as a lifelong condition. In the same way, on the other hand, some disability groups show a kind of resistance to engage with older persons. So we think between both groups, we think that when trying to integrate aging and disability policies, it is important to differentiate between persons aging with a disability and persons aging maybe into a disability, which implies different life experiences and different ways and shapes. So how the panelists see this kind of friction between both groups? Why I'm bringing that? Because we feel that there is a kind of activism and we respect all those who defend human rights, all human rights defenders, no matter what cause they're defending. But overall, there is a viewpoint of defending both without
30 seconds left
between them. So that's the question to the panelists. I think that the Geneva representative already made some hints on it. I would love to hear more about this. Thank you very much. I'm sorry to be taking the floor for more than my time. Thank you.
You're good. Thank you so much, Ms. Mucho. Now I would like to invite Ms. Nina Yorhanzi from the Age Platform Europe, who have asked the floor. So Ms. Yorhanzi, you have the floor.
Thank you. Distinguished delegates, older persons with disabilities are subject to a double oppression, that of ableism in combination with ageism. And ageism is less known and makes inequalities and discrimination in old age to be seen as natural, acceptable, or justifiable. And when the two are combined, the impact on rights is catastrophic. As others have mentioned, this has been shown in the context of COVID-19, when more than half of the deaths from the virus in Europe occurred in residential care facilities for older persons. And we knew early on that congregated settings were hotbeds of infection, but still older persons and care staff in those institutions were not prioritized. They were treated as expendable. They did not have access to protective equipment, testing. They were denied any contact with their loved ones and were refused access to life-saving medical treatment on the basis of their age or their disability. But even before the pandemic, older persons with disabilities often found themselves caught between two different support models. The CRPD implementation is largely focused on people of working age. Disability benefits and services are often capped at a certain age. Long-term care, which is typically targeting people who acquire disabilities in old age, is not seen as a disability service and is often considered as the end goal and not the means to a fulfilling life. This was shown also by the former UN Special Rapporteur, who mentioned that older persons with disabilities tend to be excluded from programs that aim to increase independence, mobility, and empowerment, such as rehabilitation and personal assistance. They are more likely to be institutionalized and to be deprived of their legal capacity. Even within the EU, in the frame of the EU Pillar of Social Rights, we have two distinct principles, one for people with disabilities of working age and one for those who need care when they're older. International norms are also biased and apply double standards. On the one hand, the CRPD tells us that people with disabilities have an undeniable right to decide where and with whom to live. And on the other hand, the standards that apply for older persons say that they are expected to live in the community only for as long as possible. So the coexistence of these standards makes it practically impossible to apply equally disability rights in old age. So I'd like to ask the governments that are represented in the panel, how do you address these inequalities, these silos, these fragmentations that exist in policies and laws? How are you planning to eliminate the age limitations and the different services and the different service models that exist for people with disabilities and older persons? And how
30 seconds left.
And how do you plan also to include in the implementation and to involve older persons with disabilities, including those who acquire disabilities for the first time in old age that are not typically considered older persons in the CRPD implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Yorhanzi. Now I would like to invite Mr. Fabian Garcia, Distinguished Representative of Ecuador. Mr. Garcia, the floor is yours. We can come back to Mr. Garcia. Let's move on to Mr. Zeno Izurar, Distinguished Representative of Algeria. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for giving me the floor. My delegation believes that this roundtable is an important opportunity to discuss some of the emerging best practices of social protection measures that are being implemented to protect older persons with disabilities in the mitigation of response to and recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. My country has declared some months ago that older persons, including the disabled, will have priority to access to COVID-19 vaccine once available. We believe that strengthening national legislation and policies in line with the convention needs to be done by involving organizations of persons with disabilities and organizations of older persons in the drafting and implementation of policies. We also believe that older persons with disabilities need to have access to adequate and sustainable social protection and leave no one behind in this regard. A monthly subsidy is provided by my country to everyone with a disability, including the elderly, and to low-income families who are sponsoring one or more old persons with disability who have no income. I have some questions for the panelists. How can the state parties have better access to comparable disability and age disaggregated data to identify and better address the obstacles faced by older persons with disabilities? And also, we do know that digital divide faced by older persons with disabilities has been exacerbated during the COVID-19 pandemic, especially in developing countries. What recommendations can the panelists provide in order to improve state parties' policies to better help other persons with disabilities access to information and communication technologies to ensure their health and well-being? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's invite Maria Florencia Gonzalez, Distinguished Representative of Argentina. The floor is yours. Ms. Maria Florencia Gonzalez, Distinguished Representative of Argentina, if you'd like to take the floor. Okay, I would like to then call out Mr. Fabian Garcia, again, Distinguished Representative of Ecuador. If you're here now, back online. Let us then move on to the next segment. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your interventions and questions posed. Let's now revert to our panelists to respond to some of the questions raised from the floor. Each panelist, please speak for about 3 minutes. Mr. Rinckenbach, if you'd like to take the floor.
Thank you, Madam. And I would like to thank all of our colleagues for their statements, remarks, and questions. I would like to recall a 2007 decree and ongoing developments of society and the means to be able to address individual circumstances. A few examples are as follows. France has raised the amount of certain services being delivered. The distinguished delegate of the European Union is focused on addressing such issues. We've also provided a right to vote for individuals under tutorship, and other services are being provided for persons with disabilities to ensure that they can exercise their rights over the course of their lives. These measures contribute to a philosophy to ensure that persons with disabilities not be viewed as a separate standalone criterion, but for them to be seen as full-fledged citizens. We seek to integrate all citizens into this mindset. And this is something that the President Macron has focused upon to ensure that the rights of persons of disabilities be prioritized. As for the question of differentiation, political approaches for persons with disabilities and older persons, I have good news having to do with the technique. The provision of a remuneration for persons with disabilities. We have an age barrier set. Over the age of 75, their number has been risen and the system has been bolstered. And there is a recent law, 7 March 2020 is the date of the law, where these services are now attributed regardless of the age. So this is one step among many other measures being taken to ensure that associations be involved and engaged in these efforts. And we are seeking to make headway to ensure that we adapt ourselves, tailor ourselves, and remain more nimble to address the needs of such persons. Thank you.
Mr. Rinckenbach, I would now like to invite Ms. Miano to respond to any question.
Yes. Can I go ahead?
Yes, please go ahead, Ms. Miano.
Yes. I am confirming that disabilities get worse as we age. And so at the end of it all, whether you are getting a disability at that particular time or whether you had a disability, that disability should be attended to. And the problem that has been there, as I said before, is that the disability movement seem to tend to the younger age and leave out the old ones. And the older ones, when they get to the older persons movement, they are also referred to the social protection offices. And there you are likely not to get a wheelchair like you would have gotten it easily from the disability movement. And so it is becoming a big problem. And I was going to think it is time that the government reviewed the policies and make it possible, as much as possible, for persons with disabilities at whatever age to be able to get an assistive device, because you really need it.
I think we lost her.
Yes, I think we've lost Ms. Miano. Ms. Miano, can you hear us? Can you hear me? I think Ms. Miano's internet seems to have been disrupted.
I can hear you. Can I go ahead or time it up?
Yes, you have 30 seconds, Ms. Miano, please.
because there could also be a fund set aside or strengthen the social protection flows in such a way that the problems of an older person are attended holistically. Yes? Not only food, but also assistive devices and also the health care and healthcare needs are met at that age. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We may send the responses later, possible, by email as well. I would like to kindly invite Mr. Wynn now to respond to any question, and please take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. In discussion with Mr. Uso Wynn, who himself, even though an older person, quite active quite actively involving with a number of activities. There's a questions about how to utilize older persons for their ability in the society by the special reporter. If I remember correctly, the person like Uso Wynn, who experienced himself living through the stigmas, the bad experience of leprosy, is now being able to talk about his life experience to the populations and public, especially when the government health services leprosy control program, and to educate, to identify new cases of leprosy, which are not coming out easily because of the stigma. So when he stand up, people tend to come up more. As we are fighting to eliminate leprosy, this is very useful with. Not only him, there are a number of persons affected by leprosy who are a bit more of older age, being part of the Myanmar Associations of Persons Affected by Leprosy, in a way utilizing, using their experience and to share the public. So this is one note I would like to make. Another questions I remember is about the disaggregated data. So the experience coming out from our country in 2014 census, when we used the paper-based census questionnaires, it was limited space to put up the Washington group census questions. Only 4 domains out of 6 domains Myanmar managed to include. So that way limited information gather. But last year in 2019, the government, they called the mid-census, inter-census survey. This time, this is a sample census. They use a tablet, computer-based, and it manage to include all the Washington group questionnaires. And in addition to that, for children, and also more information can be find out during the census. So it is important to make sure that enumerators are trained and well-oriented with the disability orientations, making sure they ask appropriate questions. In that way, that way the reach of the data will be at our head. Then only, I think, a lot of counter-argument to do something for disability, person with disability, blaming lack of data. But things like census can provide governments and the authorities reach of data, and also development partners, civil society, NGO, to do things need to be done. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Wen, and thank you, Mr. Ong, for the interpretation. Ms. Ericka Álvarez, I would now invite you to respond to any question. Floor is yours.
Thank you. I'd like to refer to the complex aspect, namely that people who are older don't always identify themselves as persons with disabilities, and the impact of that is double in nature. We, people with disabilities, are continuing to age, and now we're going to become older persons, and we're going to find ourselves in situations where we're facing greater barriers, which we've also faced as younger people with disabilities. In terms of public policies, we have to tackle this situation because otherwise we're going to have segmented and parallel systems. Costa Rica is facing a situation where we have social protection for homeless persons with disabilities, and at the age of 65, those individuals have to leave those homes, and so that there are beds for older persons with disabilities. So then these individuals lose all of their ties with their families, and that issue is not being addressed anywhere. So all of these issues have to be integrated, and we have to respect how people self-identify. The Inter-American Development Bag is promoting a concept that we should be using to join our efforts so that we can at least partially address the issues facing persons with functional disabilities. There should be devices made available to ensure that these individuals can be independent. The older persons and persons with disabilities need to be able to lead independent lives. They need the devices in order to do that, regardless of how they self-identify. I think that needs to be included in our data through national surveys, and we followed the model survey provided by the WHO, and as I said, 35% of persons with disabilities in 2018 are older persons. So clearly we have a great deal of work to do here, and we can well imagine that this is going to have a greater impact on public policies in the future. And finally, I would say that one key component is that we have to have laws that ensure legal equality for persons with disabilities so they do not lose their autonomy. Thank you.
I would now like to kindly invite Mr. Recinto to respond to any question. The floor is yours.
Grazie. Allora, in Italia lo sforzo che stiamo realizzando è quello di superare una visione sociosanitaria della disabilità e guardare alla disabilità come condizione. Questo ci consente di porre al centro dell'attenzione la persona nella sua complessità, quindi di superare taluni stereotipi legati all'età, giovane, anziano, adolescente, e guardare ai concreti bisogni che quella persona con disabilità ha in quel momento, in quella fase della sua vita. È da questo che parte il nostro approccio alla deistituzionalizzazione, da un progetto individuale che guarda innanzitutto alla persona e alle sue concrete caratteristiche.
Thank you. Well, in Italy, we are making the effort to go beyond a view that is based on the social and health parameters. We try to look at disability as a condition of the individual, and this leads to person centricity. We try not to make any distinction between childhood, teenage, old age. We try to develop this project, which is the project of the individual project.
Da questo punto di vista, come detto, abbiamo una legge che è la legge sul dopo di noi, che è una legge che tuttavia guarda soprattutto al durante noi, quindi alla possibilità che la persona con disabilità sviluppi un percorso individuale che vede un'azione complessiva nei suoi riguardi. Ed è questa la ragione per cui come Paese abbiamo deciso che la delega alla disabilità sia esercitata direttamente dal Presidente del Consiglio, proprio per evitare quello che si è detto prima, cioè azioni frammentate, azioni non coordinate, ma noi cerchiamo di realizzare un'azione centralizzata attraverso la Presidenza del Consiglio e l'Ufficio Centrale affinché tutti i provvedimenti normativi, come del resto in questa fase della pandemia, si tenga sempre in considerazione le condizioni delle persone con disabilità.
In this respect, as I said before, we have passed a law called After Us. Actually, it's a law that looks at during us. And the persons with disabilities make their individual processes, their individual pathways, and they actually take they just and that's why our country has made the decision to keep the powers on disability with the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister has centralized all activities in order to avoid what has been said before, which is carrying out parallel activities, overlapping activities, fragmented, or working in silos. Everything is centralized, and we look at and we have this holistic approach to the person with disabilities.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Recinto, and thank you, Madam, for the interpretation. I would like to thank all the distinguished delegates, excellencies, and representatives. I would now like to pass it on to Mr. Israel Choko Davies to take it forward from here. Mr. Davies.
Thank you very much, Samridhi. In this roundtable, there was an overall recommendation that we need to do more to include older persons with disabilities, meet their needs, and eliminate discrimination. The challenges for persons with disabilities often increase, become harder, and worse with advancing age. Many panelists and delegations suggested actions to address these challenges, including better social protection and affordable medical services. We've also heard of successful measures that allow older persons with disabilities to remain independent. Older persons with disabilities are more vulnerable during the COVID-19 pandemic, and continuing to provide the services they need while ensuring their safety is key. Others talk about the challenges faced by the disabled regarding transportation. Some alluded to the assistive devices that are not often accessible nor affordable. Challenges faced by the disabled in nursing homes were also flagged. Care should be made for the vulnerable. Others emphasized. Gerard Quinn said, and I quote, "We are subject and not objects," unquote, referring to the disabled. I just want to say thank you for a productive discussion. It has indeed shared concrete solutions to address the rights and needs of older persons with disabilities. This time, I would like to ask if my colleague and co-chair, Ms. Samridhi Rana Thapa, has any final words for this occasion.
Thank you, Mr. Davies. I would just like to reiterate on what I'd said before, that the issues of addressing ageism and making our communities inclusive is highly important, and it's the pressing need of the hour. Disability and aging is an intersecting component, and disability is not complete without including the older population, because the data speaks for itself. I truly believe that the discussions that we've had today from our distinguished panelists, the questions posed by the delegates have been all very fruitful, and there will be a positive path ahead for all of us to work together in this and promote an age-friendly society where all of us can live in, one that is age-friendly, disability-friendly, and completely inclusive to participate fully in society. So that's all from my side. Thank you, Mr. Davies, and I thank everybody from the bottom of my heart for your active participation in this roundtable. Thanks.
Welcome, Samridhi, and thank you very much for that final comment. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Ms. Rana Thapa, my peer co-chair, I would like to thank all of our distinguished panelists in the roundtable today, all delegates and participants from the civil society community and the United Nations system for your valuable contributions that enriched significantly the discussion of our roundtable on this important issue in addressing the rights and needs of older persons with disabilities, aging, and demographic trends. And I wish to acknowledge with sincere thanks the capable support and service of the Secretariat, notably DESA, the STESA, and all our interpreters, card service providers, and sign language interpreters, among many others who worked tirelessly behind the scene and helped to deliver this successful discussion. Thank you all for your hard work. I would also like to remind all speakers to send their statements to e-statements@un.org for posting in the UN Journal, no later than 2 hours after this delivery, if you may wish to do so. With this, I announce the roundtable is now formally concluded. Thanks to everyone.
Thank you.
Samridhi, thanks so much.
Thank you, Mr. Davies. Such a pleasure.
Thanks for our panelists. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Tomine and Evelyn, for all the assistance.
Yes, Evelyn, you did great.
Thank you, Mr. Israel. Thank you, Ms. Samridhi.
Thanks for the support.
Thank you, all the panelists.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye-bye. Bye.